Chapter 1. The Box in the Attic. The attic smelled like a mix of cedar, dust, and old mysteries. Charlie Ross sneezed once, then twice, the kind of sneeze that made the single bulb hanging from the rafters sway like it was laughing at him. He was 10, an explorer by right, mischief maker by nature, and currently, a treasure hunter of the highest order. His mission had begun innocently enough. Grandma Sherry had sent him upstairs to look for the fall decorations. A box marked autumn leaves, wreaths, and pumpkins, fake, written in her grandmotherly handwriting that always had little hearts over the eyes. But somewhere between "don't touch anything else" and "be careful" on the latter, Charlie's brain had translated the task into "find something awesome." And he had. The box was large, heavier than expected, and had a name scrawled across it in faded black marker. Arthur Ross, 1978 to 1986. Do not throw away. Charlie's curiosity was like an alarm that couldn't be turned off. He wiped the dust away and cracked open the flaps. Inside, he found what looked like treasure from a wizard's attic. There were stacks of old, yellowed papers bound with rubber bands. Hand-drawn maps. Small gray metal figures. Tiny knights, goblins, and dragons. Dice in every color imaginable, including one that looked like a gemstone and another shaped like a pyramid. There were books too. Fat, worn rulebooks with covers that promised adventure, heroism, danger. Charlie's eyes widened. Whoa. He reached in and picked up a pewter wizard miniature, holding it up to the light like it was Excalibur itself. "What are you doing up there, Charlie?" came the distant voice of his grandmother. "Just finding pumpkins," he called back. "Fake ones." He tucked the wizard into his hoodie pocket and grinned. This was way better than pumpkins. Later that afternoon, Arthur Ross was in his armchair, pretending to read the newspaper, but mostly snoozing behind it, when Charlie burst into the living room carrying the dusty box like a conquistador returning with gold. "Grandpa, Grandpa, look what I found." Arthur lowered the paper just enough for one eye to peek over the top. His white eyebrows twitched. "Good Lord, Charlie, where did you, the attic? It's got your name on it." Arthur blinked once, then twice, and sat up straighter. "You found that old thing?" "Yeah." Charlie dropped it onto the coffee table with a thud, sending a puff of dust into the air. "What is it?" Arthur smiled, slow and nostalgic. "That, young man, is a box of adventure." Charlie's eyes gleamed. "Like treasure?" "Better," Arthur said. "Imagination." That earned him a puzzled squint from his grandson, the kind that 10-year-olds give adults when they're clearly withholding critical information. Arthur chuckled and pulled out one of the dice, a 20-sider, blue and chipped at the edges. "This is from a game I used to play with my friends before your dad was born. We'd sit around a table, make up heroes, and go on quests. We called it the Realms of Valor." Charlie was hooked. "Can you teach me?" "Well, it takes a group," Arthur said, rubbing his chin. "You need a party, heroes, adventurers, and a storyteller to guide them." "I can get people," Charlie said instantly. "My friends at school will love this. There's Ben and Oliver, and—" Arthur raised a hand, half amused, half alarmed. "Easy there, Tiger. If we're doing this, we'll need permission from parents, snacks, and I'll need to brush up on the rules. It's been, 40 years. Charlie grinned, so wide Arthur could count missing teeth. That evening, the apartment. Greg Ross had long ago learned that parenthood was a delicate balance between chaos and gratitude. He'd come home from his shift at the tech repair shop, shirt slightly wrinkled, tie stuffed in his jacket pocket, and found his son and his father sitting at the dining table surrounded by dice, maps, and the kind of uncontained enthusiasm that usually meant trouble. "Oh," Greg said, dropping his keys in the bowl. "Do I even want to know?" Arthur looked up with a grin that could light a city block. "We're bringing the Realms of Valor back." "The what now?" "The Realms of Valor," Charlie repeated proudly. "Grandpa says it's like a game where you pretend to be knights and wizards and you fight dragons. And he said if I find 4 more players, we can play every Saturday." Greg shot a look at his father. "Every Saturday?" Arthur shrugged, his expression the picture of innocence. "It keeps him off screens, son. You should be thanking me." "I am thanking you," Greg said, quietly, internally, with a small amount of fear. Sherry appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a floral apron. "It'll be lovely, Greg." Arthur hasn't had this much spark in his eyes in years. "Yeah, Dad," Greg said dryly. "Last time you had this much spark, you tried to fix the lawnmower with duct tape." Arthur ignored the jab. "Trust me, it'll be great. All we need is permission slips for the kids, and one parent to volunteer to stay during the first session." Greg blinked. "Permission slips? You're turning the house into a gaming club." Arthur puffed his chest. "We prefer the term guild." Charlie was already running for the printer, shouting, "I'm making flyers." The next day, school pickup line, Greg leaned against his car, waiting for Charlie to appear among the stampede of backpacks and sneakers. Parenting at this school meant surviving small talk with other parents about soccer schedules, fundraisers, and kale smoothies. Greg usually nodded, smiled, and made up excuses to escape early. This time, though, Charlie came running toward him waving a stack of papers. "Dad, everyone wants to play." He handed Greg a crumpled list. 7 names, all in various forms of 10-year-old handwriting, covered the page. Greg scanned it. "You got 7? You only need 4. They all want in. But Grandpa says only if all their parents sign a form and come to meet you guys. He said it's for accountability and socialization." Greg frowned at the last word. "That sounds like Mom." "Grandma." Charlie corrected. She helped him make the forms. Of course she did, Greg thought. His mother was the benevolent architect of all wholesome schemes. Saturday afternoon. The big meeting. The living room had been transformed into something between a classroom and a snack bar. Sherry had laid out cookies. Arthur had a dry erase board with "Welcome to the Realms of Valor Guild" written across it in perfect calligraphy. Greg, wearing jeans and a flannel, was mostly trying to look like he had control of the situation. One by one, the parents arrived. There were polite handshakes, compliments about the house, and conversations about safety rules. Then came the last parent, the one who arrived just a little late. Her name was Emily Hayes. Greg noticed her first by the sound of her laugh, a little embarrassed, a little musical. She came in carrying a folder and a pink water bottle that looked more professional than any parent accessory had a right to be. Her daughter, Lucy, was beside her, a bright-eyed girl with curls and a backpack full of dice-shaped keychains. "Sorry we're late," Emily said, smiling apologetically. Lucy insisted on stopping for muffins. "Good muffins," Lucy said with conviction. Sherry welcomed them warmly. Arthur cracked a joke, and well, Greg tried to remember how words worked. "Hi," he said, shaking her hand. "Greg Ross, Charlie's dad. Emily Hayes, Lucy's mom," she replied, her grip firm, her smile genuine. "This is a wonderful idea. Lucy's been begging to join something creative." "Oh, good," Greg said, still holding her hand slightly too long. "We're very creative. Dangerously creative, even." Arthur coughed loudly. "We'll begin the orientation shortly." Emily laughed again, that soft, musical sound that made Greg feel like someone had turned the lights up a little brighter. Later that evening, after the meeting, the house was buzzing with excitement. Parents had all agreed. Arthur had his roster, and Charlie was vibrating like a soda can on the edge of explosion. Greg helped Sherry clean up, sneaking glances out the window where Emily was helping Lucy into their car. "She seems nice," Sherry said casually, drying a dish. Greg shrugged, a little too quickly. "Yeah, sure. She's nice. Single mom, I heard. Works from home as a graphic designer." "You got all that from a 10-minute conversation." Sherry smiled knowingly. "Mothers have ways." Greg groaned. "Mom, don't start." "I'm not starting anything," she said sweetly. "I'm just saying, you could use a friend your own age who isn't named Laptop." Arthur wandered in, still humming with excitement. "The kids are going to love this. And I have a feeling this game is going to be more eventful than the last time I ran it." "Eventful how?" Greg asked suspiciously. Arthur just grinned. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe a quest for treasure. Maybe a little magic. Maybe even a romance subplot." Greg sighed. "You've been talking to Mom again, haven't you?" Arthur winked. "Always." Charlie's room. That night, Charlie lay in bed with the wizard miniature on his nightstand, his mind buzzing with possibilities. He could be a dragon slayer, a hero, a wizard. Maybe Lucy could be the healer, or Ben could be the archer. And Grandpa would be the dungeon master, the boss of the story. It was going to be epic. He drifted off to sleep imagining himself charging into battle, sword raised high, shouting his war cry. Down the hall, Greg sat on the couch, staring at his phone but not really seeing the screen. He kept thinking about Emily Hayes. About the way she'd smiled when Lucy laughed. The way she'd tucked her hair behind her ear while signing the permission slip. "Dad," Charlie mumbled from his room, half asleep. "We're gonna fight dragons." Greg smiled faintly. "You sure are, kiddo." He didn't know it yet, but dragons weren't the only thing he'd be facing soon. Chapter 2. The first quest. Saturday afternoons at the Ross house had always been a comfortable mix of chores, laundry, and the occasional argument over who used the last of the milk. But this Saturday, the dining room had been transformed into something extraordinary. Arthur Ross had gone all in. There was a hand-drawn parchment map spread across the long oak table, miniature mountains sketched with precise ink lines, rivers curling like blue ribbons, and towns marked with names that only Arthur could have invented: Grindale, Moonspire, and the Hollowed Reach. Books were stacked high. Dice were polished. Snacks were strategically placed between player stations: chips, grapes, and a dangerously large bowl of popcorn. And in the center, like a king behind his castle wall, Arthur sat with a screen decorated with dragons and runes, beaming like he'd just discovered time travel. Charlie's POV. Charlie felt like his brain was vibrating with excitement. He'd spent all week recruiting his friends, 7 kids total, which meant Grandpa had to make cutting decisions and party balance charts. In the end, 6 kids got in, plus Grandpa as dungeon master. That left 2 adult spots unfilled. But Grandpa had a plan for that. Charlie didn't know what it was yet, but whenever Grandpa got that twinkle in his eye, things happened. Good, funny, sometimes chaotic things. The first to arrive was Lucy and her mom, Emily. Lucy carried her notebook like a spell book and wore a t-shirt that said "Roll for Adventure." "Hey, Charlie," she said, waving. "Hey, Lucy, you ready to fight monsters?" "Totally," she said. "Mom helped me make a character. She's an elf." Emily laughed. She spent an hour arguing over whether elves could have pink hair. "Can they?" Charlie asked, dead serious. Arthur appeared beside them. "In my campaign," he said gravely. "They absolutely can." Lucy gasped. "Yes." Greg's POV. Greg leaned against the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching the spectacle unfold with that wary amusement only single parents have. It wasn't that he didn't get it. The excitement, the dice, the dragons. He'd been a kid once. He'd played video games, read fantasy novels. But Arthur's commitment level was intimidating. His dad had built a cardboard castle facade around his dungeon master's chair. There was even mood lighting. "Dad," Greg said, "you realize you've turned the dining room into Comic-Con?" Arthur adjusted his glasses, not looking up from his notes. "It's called immersion." "Uh-huh. You sure it's not called grandparent mania?" Sherry breezed by with a tray of lemonade glasses. "Hush, Greg. It's adorable." "It's terrifying," he muttered. "Terrifyingly adorable," she corrected, setting a glass in his hand. "Also, put on a smile. Emily's staying for the first session." Greg blinked. "She is?" "Parent supervision," Sherry said sweetly. Arthur insisted. Arthur looked up just in time to wink. Oh no, Greg thought. They were scheming again. Emily's POV. Emily Hayes hadn't expected to be here. When Lucy begged her to come meet the dungeon grandpa, she thought it would be a quick hello, a handshake, and a promise to bring snacks next week. She hadn't anticipated Sherry's gentle insistence that she stay for just one session to get a feel for it. Now she was sitting at the table, surrounded by eager children and a man in his 60s who looked like he was about to lead a rebellion. And, unfortunately for her composure, across the table sat Greg Ross. He was smiling awkwardly at her, one hand running through his hair, his flannel sleeves rolled up in that effortless way that made him look, well, not like a man who lived with his parents, that was for sure. "Sorry," Greg said, setting his coffee aside. "This might get weird." Emily grinned. "Weird's my comfort zone." She had meant it as a joke, but his eyes flickered, surprised, maybe a little impressed. "Then you're in the right place," he said, and somehow it sounded like more than a joke. Arthur's POV. Arthur had been waiting years for this. He adjusted his dungeon master screen, cracked his knuckles, and looked over his gathered adventurers. 6 children, one slightly bewildered single mom, and one son who had no idea what was about to happen to him. "Welcome, brave heroes," he began, voice deep and dramatic. "You find yourselves in the humble village of Green Hollow, where rumors speak of dark forces stirring in the north." Charlie was instantly hooked. "I draw my sword." Lucy added, "I check for traps." Ben said, "I eat the tavern bread." Arthur grinned. They were naturals. And then, casually, as if it were no big deal, he added, "Before your party departs, 2 strangers join your group. The wandering swordsman Gareth of Havenbrook and the mysterious healer Alara of the Moonvale." Greg looked up. "Wait, who?" Arthur handed him a sheet. "You're Gareth. Strong, brave, and occasionally grumpy. It'll be a stretch." Greg blinked. "Dad, no." "And you?" Arthur said to Emily, handing her another sheet. "Are Alara, a healer with a hidden past and a tendency to roll her eyes at fools." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I like her already." The kids cheered. Greg groaned. "I'm not. I didn't sign up for." "Too late." Arthur declared. "Your story begins." Greg's POV, again, it was ridiculous. He was sitting at a table pretending to be a warrior named Gareth while his father narrated a quest about goblin-infested forests. And yet, he couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed this much. Charlie was leaning so far forward his nose nearly touched the table. Lucy was talking in a British accent. The other kids were arguing over whether to attack or negotiate with the goblins. And Emily was in it. Her eyes lit up as she described healing a wounded villager. She even clasped her hands dramatically, whispering, "By moonlight's grace." Before rolling her dice, Arthur gave her a nod of approval. "A natural." Greg couldn't stop smiling. "You've done this before?" She shook her head. "Nope, but I was a theater major for a year." That explained a lot. When her dice landed perfectly on a 20, the table erupted in cheers. She laughed, covering her face. "Beginner's luck." Arthur leaned forward. "Or destiny." Greg caught his dad's wink and groaned. "Oh no, he's matchmaking in character now." Charlie's POV, it was the best day of Charlie's life. He was a knight. Lucy was an elf. Grandpa was a wizard, sort of. And his dad, his actual dad, was smiling. Not the polite smile he used at work events or when people told him, "You're doing great as a single parent," but a real, teeth-showing, eye-squinting smile. And Emily's mom laughed at all his jokes, even the bad ones. This was epic. At one point, Grandpa described a treasure chest covered in vines and runes. Everyone held their breath as Lucy's character opened it. Inside, a glowing crystal and a scroll. Arthur paused dramatically. The scroll bears 2 words, "Next Saturday." The table laughed, but the kids groaned. "Already?" Charlie said. "We can't stop here. All heroes must rest," Arthur said wisely. "You'll need your strength for the next chapter." Later, after the game, the kids ran outside to play, their laughter echoing through the yard. Sherry busied herself with dishes, humming softly. That left Greg and Emily at the table, collecting dice and scraps of paper. "So," Greg said, stacking character sheets, "did you survive your first quest?" "Barely," she said, smiling. "I think my character's backstory is more complicated than my taxes." He laughed. "That's how Dad runs things. Everyone gets emotional trauma and a dragon to fight." Emily tilted her head. "Sounds like life." Greg looked up, caught off guard by the truth in that. "Yeah, guess so." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that feels like an invitation instead of an absence. Outside, Charlie and Lucy were sword fighting with sticks, shouting battle cries. Emily glanced out the window. "They're cute together." "Yeah," Greg said softly. "They really are." Her eyes flicked back to him. So are their dads. He blinked. She laughed, standing. I'll see you next Saturday, Gareth. And before he could recover, she was out the door, sunlight catching her hair as she went. Arthur and Sherry's POV. From the kitchen doorway, Sherry watched her son stare at the empty doorway long after Emily left. Arthur leaned beside her, smug. Well, that went better than expected. Sherry handed him a towel. You're terrible. Genius, he corrected. Now they have a reason to spend time together every week. You're playing with fire. Arthur grinned. Fire makes dragons fly. Sherry sighed but smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. You old romantic. Guilty, he said, kissing her forehead. Now what's the rule about meddling? There isn't one, she said. We wrote them all. Greg. Late night, the apartment was quiet. Charlie was asleep, clutching his wizard miniature like a totem. Greg sat at his desk, character sheet still in front of him. Gareth of Havenbrook, strength 16, charisma 10, mood, complicated. He couldn't help but chuckle. Maybe his dad was right. Maybe a little imagination was exactly what he needed. He looked at the note Emily had scribbled in the corner of her sheet before she left. If we're still alive next session, I'm healing you first. Alara, he smiled. Maybe she wasn't just talking about the game. Chapter 3, The Goblin Feast. If there were awards for Most Chaotic Saturday, the Ross household would have swept the category. By 2 o'clock, the dining room table looked like a medieval war zone. Snack crumbs formed mountain ranges. Juice boxes stood like miniature taverns. A lone 20-sided die rolled off the edge and vanished beneath the radiator, perhaps forever. Arthur, the dungeon master, stood at the helm of it all, commanding attention with his usual flair. Last week, he began in his best movie trailer voice. Our brave adventurers rescued the lost villager and uncovered a map to the goblin caves. But beware, rumors speak of a feast of mischief, a goblin celebration where travelers mysteriously disappear. The kids gasped in perfect unison. Charlie nearly vibrated with excitement. He was already in costume, a paper crown labeled Sir Charlock, Defender of Truth. Lucy wore a sparkly scarf as a cloak. Even Ben had brought a plastic sword from home. And then there were the adults. Greg had sworn he'd only stay for moral support, but somehow his Gareth of Havenbrook character sheet had migrated back in front of him. Beside him, Emily was back as Alara the healer, wearing a silver pendant that looked suspiciously like a moon. Coincidence? Unlikely. Greg was beginning to suspect she was leaning into her character, and he didn't mind one bit. Charlie's POV. Charlie could hardly sit still. Grandpa's stories were epic. There were goblins who sang, forests that whispered, and magic crystals that could grant wishes. But what made it even better was watching his dad laugh. Dad almost never laughed at work things or bills or grown-up stuff. But here, he laughed all the time, especially when Miss Emily was around. She was cool. She talked to him like a real person, not just a kid. She even helped him come up with a backstory for Sir Charlock, tragic loss, noble heart, possibly lactose intolerant. Now the goblin drums were pounding, and Grandpa was making sound effects with his mouth. Doom, 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 he said, pounding the table. Everyone giggled, but Charlie leaned forward, eyes wide. Grandpa, he whispered, do goblins really eat people? Arthur leaned over the dungeon master screen. Only if the dice say so. Arthur's POV. Arthur Ross was in his element. His voice filled the room as he described flickering torchlight and slimy tunnels. He'd even printed ambient cave noises from YouTube and left them looping faintly on his tablet. The kids were hooked. Every one of them. But what Arthur secretly enjoyed most was glancing at his son. Greg looked alive. Not the tired, distracted version of himself that had moved back home 8 years ago after the divorce. Not the quiet man who spent nights fixing computers and paying bills. This was the Greg who used to stay up late reading fantasy novels under his blanket with a flashlight. Emily, too, was radiant, laughing, gesturing dramatically, cheering for the kids' dice rolls. Arthur smiled behind his screen. His grand experiment was working beautifully. Now for phase 2. He cleared his throat. As your heroes approach the goblin feast, they find 2 thrones, one of gold, one of stone. The Goblin King demands that Gareth and Alara sit beside him as guests of honor. Greg blinked. Wait, what? Emily chuckled. Oh. Arthur steepled his fingers. The Goblin King insists. Refusing might be dangerous. The kids erupted in laughter. Greg sighed. Of course. I sit. Emily followed, trying not to smile. Same. Arthur grinned. Perfect. Greg's POV. He'd forgotten how fast his dad could railroad people into nonsense. Now he was pretending to be an armored mercenary at a goblin banquet while a group of 10-year-olds chanted, "Eat the stew. Eat the stew." Lucy narrated in her elf voice. I check if the stew is poisonous. Arthur nodded. Roll for it. She rolled, and the die landed on a 1. Arthur gasped dramatically. It's deliciously poisonous. The table exploded in laughter. Charlie fell off his chair. Dad, he giggled. You're poisoned. Greg groaned. Of course I am. Emily leaned in, grinning. Don't worry, Gareth. I've got healing magic. He looked up at her and smirked. Better make it the strong stuff. She pretended to whisper a spell, hands hovering over his sheet. By moonlight's grace, remove man-flu. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his lemonade. Arthur scribbled notes behind his screen. Sherry, watching from the doorway, exchanged a knowing smile with him. Everything was going according to plan. Emily's POV. She hadn't laughed like this in ages. Not the polite office kind of laugh, but the full, unfiltered kind that made your sides hurt. Greg was easy to tease, self-deprecating, warm, just a little awkward in a way that made her feel at ease. The way he looked at his son melted her heart every time. When Arthur paused the session for a snack break, the kids scattered to the kitchen, leaving her and Greg alone for a moment. "So," he said, stacking dice, "how's life as a healer?" She smiled. "A little messy, mostly improvising." "You." He nodded at his character sheet. "Still emotionally unavailable, but great with a sword." That made her laugh again. "You're a natural at this," he said after a beat. "The game, I mean." "I'm a graphic designer," she said, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Storytelling's kind of my thing." He hesitated. "You work from home?" "Yeah. It's nice, but it gets quiet. Lucy keeps me sane." Greg smiled faintly. "I get that." There was a softness in his voice, a trace of loneliness that made her want to say something comforting. But before she could, Charlie burst back into the room, holding 2 cans of soda like trophies. "Snack Boss is back," he declared. And just like that, the moment passed. Charlie's POV, the second half of the game was even better. The heroes escaped the goblin caves, barely, rescued a talking raven, and found a clue about a magical sword. When Alara healed Gareth after the battle, Grandpa made them both roll for emotional impact. Emily rolled a 20. Greg rolled a 2. Arthur leaned back and grinned. You feel a warm spark of gratitude that you will definitely ignore. The kids howled with laughter. Charlie nudged Lucy. "They like each other," he whispered. Lucy smirked. "Obviously. Think they'll get married? Maybe if they survive the dragon." Charlie nodded, satisfied. "Cool." Arthur's POV. As the game wound down, Arthur wrapped up the session with a flourish. And so, the heroes of Green Hollow emerge from the goblin caves victorious, but somewhere in the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes watch and wait. "Cliffhanger," Charlie shouted. Arthur smiled. "Indeed. Next week, we continue our adventure." The kids clapped. Lucy high-fived Charlie. Greg and Emily started helping clean up the avalanche of dice. Arthur leaned toward Sherry, whispering, "Phase 3 complete." She rolled her eyes. "Arthur, it's not a spy mission." "Oh, but it is," he said smugly. "Operation Cupid and the Cleric." Good grief. Later, the cleanup, the kids ran outside again, chasing each other with foam swords. Greg and Emily lingered in the dining room, finishing the last of the lemonade. "Your dad's really something," Emily said. "It's like he's running a movie in his head." "He's been like that my whole life," Greg said with a fond smile. "When I was little, he used to tell bedtime stories with cliffhangers. I'd beg for one more chapter." "I get it," she said softly. "Lucy's the same way." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by papers and crumbs, the quiet hum of the house wrapping around them. Then, without really planning it, Greg said, "You know, the kids are going to want to practice their character voices. Maybe we should coordinate." "Coordinate," she echoed, smiling. "For consistency," he said, trying and failing to sound professional. "You know, so our stories match." She tilted her head, clearly amused. "You're asking me to rehearse a fake fantasy adventure?" He shrugged. "Dinner and dialogue." She laughed. "You're smooth, Gareth." "Mostly accidental." Before she could respond, Arthur's voice rang from the kitchen. "Make sure to bring snacks next week, Alara." Emily grinned. "Guess it's a date." Sherry's POV. Later that night, Sherry sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies blink in the yard. Arthur joined her with 2 mugs of tea. "You're quite pleased with yourself," she said. "Of course I am. It's working." He's smiling again. She's smiling again. "And Charlie?" He nodded toward the yard, where Charlie was showing Lucy his toy sword. "That kid's got more joy than half the world." Sherry sipped her tea. "You meddle too much." Arthur smiled. "Only in service of love." She leaned against him. "You're a romantic fool. Always have been." He kissed her temple. "Next week, I introduce the dragon. That should really heat things up." Greg's POV. Midnight. Charlie was asleep again, curled up with his stuffed griffin. Greg sat at his desk, scrolling through messages. A new one popped up from Emily. "Just wanted to say thanks for today." Lucy had a blast. Also, Alara demands that Gareth stop nearly dying every session. Smiley face. He grinned and typed back. "Tell Alara I'm doing my best, but heroism is dangerous work." She suggests investing in better armor. He suggests dinner next Friday. There was a pause. Then the 3 little dots appeared. "Armor and dinner. Deal." Greg leaned back, heart unexpectedly light. Somewhere in the quiet of the apartment, he heard Charlie mumble in his sleep. "Get the treasure, Dad." Greg smiled. "Working on it, kiddo." Chapter 4. Dinner and Dragons. The Friday night of Greg's so-called rehearsal dinner started innocently enough. He'd told himself, and his parents, that it wasn't a date. It was a creative strategy session, strictly professional, no ulterior motives, nothing romantic about it whatsoever. Unfortunately, he'd made that declaration while ironing a shirt and checking his reflection in the mirror 3 times. Sherry had not been fooled. "Sweetheart," she'd said, leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Maybe add that blue tie. It brings out your eyes." "Mom," Greg had groaned. "It's not a date." "Yes, you've mentioned," she said, amused. "Just 2 grown adults meeting over dinner in a restaurant with candles." He sighed. "It's a diner." "Even better," she said. "No mood lighting to blame." Arthur appeared behind her, holding a 20-sided die. "Roll for confidence, son." Greg rolled his eyes. You're both insufferable. Arthur grinned. We're invested. Charlie's POV. Charlie had been informed that Grandma and Grandpa were in charge for the night, which usually meant dessert at inappropriate times and bedtime stories that went way off script. This time, though, Grandpa had a gleam in his eye, the one he got when plotting something elaborate. Operation Dragon Date. He whispered to Charlie once his dad had left. Charlie's eyes widened. What's that? Classified, Arthur said solemnly. But it involves courage, subtlety, and possibly cake. Charlie was in. Emily's POV. Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, second-guessing everything. It wasn't a date. It was a planning dinner. Still, she had changed her outfit 4 times. The final choice, soft green blouse, jeans, and just enough makeup to say I care, but not too much, seemed safe. Lucy, sitting on the counter with her legs swinging, was less subtle. You like him, she sing-songed. I do not. Lucy smirked. Mom, you straightened your hair. That proves nothing. And you're wearing perfume. Go brush your teeth, Emily said, flushing. Lucy hopped down, grinning. Okay, but Grandpa Arthur says I should believe in destiny. Emily froze mid-swipe of lip gloss. He what? See ya. Lucy chirped and ran off. Emily closed her eyes. They're all in on it. The diner was cozy, all warm lights and soft chatter. The kind of place where time slowed down just enough to feel like a pause button. Greg was already there, sitting at a booth with 2 menus and a nervous smile. Hey, he said as she walked in. You look, very coordinated. I mean nice. You look nice. She laughed, sliding into the seat across from him. Thanks. You look less panicked than I expected. That's the caffeine. They ordered burgers and fries, and by the time the waitress left, the awkwardness had melted into something comfortable. So, Emily said, tapping the table. Tell me, oh noble Gareth, what's our next move in this grand tale? He grinned. Dad says the next session involves a dragon. Of course it does. Classic escalation. He's probably got props. Maybe actual smoke machines. She laughed. I hope so. I want cinematic realism. He hesitated. You really enjoy it, don't you? The game. She nodded. I do. It's freeing. It's like being 12 again, but with better snacks. Yeah, he said quietly. It's been good for Charlie. For all of us, really. Something softened in his tone, and Emily caught it. That weight, the years of single fatherhood etched into the spaces between his words. You're a good dad, she said simply. He looked down, almost embarrassed. Trying to be. You are, she insisted. Charlie's lucky. Greg looked up then, and their eyes met. A beat too long, the kind of silence that feels like a door opening. He smiled. So is Lucy. Yeah, she said softly. We've both got good kids. Their food arrived, mercifully breaking the spell. But it lingered, like static in the air, warm, charged, impossible to ignore. Arthur's POV. Meanwhile, back at the Ross residence, Arthur was in full mission control mode. All right, agents, he told the assembled crew. Charlie, Lucy, Ben, who'd been dropped off for movie night, and Sherry, who was stirring brownie batter. Operation Dragon Date is officially underway. Sherry sighed. Arthur, they're at a diner, not storming a castle. Semantics, he said, adjusting his imaginary headset. Phase 1, parental bonding. Phase 2, romantic realization. Phase 3, post-date debrief. Phase 4, grounded, Sherry muttered. Charlie was taking notes in a spiral notebook. Do we need disguises? Always, Arthur said seriously. But tonight, our mission is patience. True love takes timing. Lucy nodded sagely. And snacks. Arthur grinned. Exactly. Greg's POV. Halfway through dinner, the conversation had drifted from dragons to real life. Emily told him about her freelance projects, the clients who thought just one little revision meant rewriting everything. Greg shared stories about his customers, the ones who brought in laptops filled with cookie crumbs and asked why they were running slow. They laughed until they both wiped tears from their eyes. At one point, the waitress passed by and smiled knowingly. You two make a cute couple. Greg froze. Emily choked on her soda. Oh, we're not, Greg started. Dating, Emily finished. The waitress winked. Sure you're not. Refill. After she left, they both laughed again, softer this time. Greg leaned back. Maybe we should have brought the dice. Roll to deny attraction. Emily grinned. Natural 1. Emily's POV. When they finished eating, neither of them wanted to leave just yet. Walk, Greg suggested. Sure, she said. But only if there's dessert after. He smirked. Negotiator. They ended up at the small park nearby, the one with fairy lights strung through the trees for the fall festival. It was quiet except for the hum of crickets and the distant sound of traffic. So, Emily said, hands in her jacket pockets. Has your dad always been like that? The theatrical thing? Oh yeah, Greg said. He once hosted my 7th birthday party in full wizard robes. Mom still finds glitter in the carpet. Emily laughed. That's incredible. Or traumatizing. Depends who you ask. They reached a bench under a string of lights. Greg sat, glancing up at the stars. You know, I used to think all that stuff was silly. The make-believe, the dragons. But then Charlie started, actually living through it. Finding joy in it. I realized maybe my dad's magic wasn't so crazy. Emily sat beside him. It's not silly. It's hope, with better costumes. He turned to her, surprised by the poetry of it. Hope, he repeated. She smiled. Yeah, you can't fight dragons without a little hope. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Greg said, softly, thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for asking, she replied. And there it was again, that quiet spark between them. Not fireworks, not explosions. Just warmth. Like something beginning to thaw. Charlie's POV. At home, Charlie and Lucy were sprawled on the couch watching The Princess Bride. When the hero kissed the princess, Lucy threw a popcorn kernel at the screen. Ew. Charlie frowned thoughtfully. You think our parents are kissing right now? Lucy made a face. Gross. Yeah, gross, he said, though he sounded less sure. But maybe kinda nice, too. Arthur coughed dramatically from his armchair. I'll neither confirm nor deny, Agent Charlock. Sherry shook her head. You two are incorrigible. Arthur grinned. I prefer romantically proactive. Greg's POV. Later that night, he walked Emily to her car, trying to act like it was no big deal that his pulse had apparently decided to run a marathon. Well, she said, keys in hand, this was fun. Unexpectedly so. Yeah, he said. I didn't even get to show you my character's tragic backstory. Guess you'll have to save that for the next planning session, she teased. He grinned. You're assuming there'll be another one. I'm optimistic, she said. Besides, we have to make sure Gareth and Alara survive the dragon. Right? He said, pretending that was the only reason. Strictly professional. Of course, she said, smiling. Totally professional. He hesitated, then said, quietly. Still, thanks for giving this whole thing a chance. The game. My dad's madness. My everything. She looked at him, her expression soft. You're easier to give a chance to than you think. Before he could answer, she leaned up and kissed him. A quick, gentle brush of lips, like punctuation at the end of a really good sentence. Good night, Greg, she said, and slipped into her car. He stood there long after her taillights disappeared. Arthur and Sherry's POV. Arthur was waiting by the window when Greg's car pulled up. He's smiling, Arthur whispered. Look at that grin. Sherry didn't even look up from her knitting. You're impossible. He patted her knee. I'm successful. Go to bed, Merlin. He chuckled. After I logged the results. Phase 4, progress. Greg's POV. Midnight. Charlie was fast asleep, clutching his miniature sword like always. Greg sat on the couch, unable to wipe the grin off his face. He replayed the night in his head. The laughter, the easy conversation, the kiss. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Hope you didn't get eaten by any dragons on the way home. He smiled and typed back. Barely escaped. The healer was very helpful. The reply came a moment later. Asterisk, she might be available for more quests. Winky face. Asterisk, Greg leaned back, heart thudding. Maybe Arthur was right. Maybe a little imagination was exactly what he'd needed to find something real. Arthur's POV. The next morning, at breakfast, Arthur stirred his coffee dramatically. So, how was rehearsal? Greg tried to hide his smile behind his toast. Productive. Define productive, Arthur said. Dad, did you slay any dragons? Greg shot him a look. Maybe one. Arthur grinned, satisfied. Excellent. Charlie, munching cereal, looked between them. Are we talking about real dragons or girl dragons? Sherry nearly choked on her tea. Arthur winked at his grandson. Sometimes, kid, there's no difference. Chapter 5, The Dragon's Lair. Saturday morning dawned crisp and golden, the kind of fall day that smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon. For most people, it was a normal weekend. For the Ross household, it was game day. Arthur had woken at dawn to prepare the battlefield, which, in his case, meant turning the sunroom into a fantasy war room. There were folding tables, stacks of graph paper, candles, battery-operated, Sherry insisted, and a speaker looping medieval lute music. By 9 a.m., the place looked like a Renaissance fair had exploded. Sherry walked in, took one look around, and sighed fondly. You're incorrigible. Arthur was hunched over the game board, painting tiny scorch marks onto a cardboard map. Artistic detail, my dear. The dragon's lair must inspire awe. You're inspiring carpet stains, she said. Greatness demands sacrifice. Greg's POV. From the apartment, Greg could hear his father's voice booming through the morning air. Children of destiny. Ready your dice. Charlie was already in costume. If you could call a towel cape and cardboard sort of costume, and bouncing like a pinball. Dad, Grandpa says we're finally fighting the dragon today. Greg yawned, still nursing his coffee. Good. Maybe it'll tire you out. Charlie rolled his eyes. You're just jealous because your guy got turned into a frog last week. That was entrapment, Greg said. And it's your grandfather's fault for letting Lucy's character learn transformation magic. Lucy's awesome, Charlie said. She saved you. Yeah, Greg muttered. From you. Charlie shrugged. Teamwork. Greg smiled despite himself. The game had become their shared rhythm, a weekly dose of chaos that somehow made life feel steadier. Still, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about Emily since the diner. Every time he looked at his phone, he half expected a message from her. He'd told himself the kiss had been a spur-of-the-moment thing. His heartbeat strongly disagreed. Emily's POV. Across town, Emily was trying to braid Lucy's hair while her daughter squirmed like an eel. Hold still, Emily said, trying not to stab her with the comb. Mom, I don't need fancy hair for D&D. It's not fancy. It's warrior braids. Lucy grinned. Like Alara? Exactly. She paused, tying off the braid. So, you excited to see everyone again? Yeah. Lucy beamed. Especially Mr. Ross. He's funny. He pretends not to like magic, but he totally does. Emily smiled faintly. He does, doesn't he? Lucy peered up at her mom. You like him, huh? Emily opened her mouth, but Lucy's knowing look stopped her. What makes you say that? You blush every time he texts you. Emily feigned horror. Do not. You so do. Betrayed by my own child, Emily muttered. Lucy giggled. You should marry him. Emily blinked. Lucy, what? Then we'd be like a team. And Grandpa Arthur says, Emily groaned. Of course he does. The gathering, by mid-morning, the Ross sunroom buzzed with energy. 7 kids, a table full of snacks, and Arthur, the self-proclaimed dungeon master, standing at the head of the table in a cloak that had once been a shower curtain. Sherry was pouring lemonade with the patience of a saint. Emily and Greg arrived at the same time, their hands brushing briefly as they both reached for the same door handle. Morning, Greg said, smiling. Hey, Emily replied, a little too quickly. Ready for dragon slaying? Mentally? No. Emotionally? Also no. She laughed. At least you're consistent. Inside, the kids cheered as they entered. Mom, Mr. Ross, you're late. Lucy cried. 5 minutes, Greg said. That's barely a side quest. Arthur banged a spoon against his mug. Heroes, assemble. Everyone gathered around the table. Arthur's eyes gleamed. Today, you face your most perilous foe yet. The dragon of Elderspire. Its lair lies deep within the cinder caverns, guarded by puzzles, traps, and one very moody sphinx. Charlie whispered to Lucy. He practiced that speech in the mirror. Arthur cleared his throat. I heard that. Charlie's POV, this was it, the big one. The dragon fight. Grandpa had been teasing it for weeks. Charlie's character, Sir Chucklehelm the Brave, was finally going to prove his worth. He had a magic sword, cardboard, but still, and the best team ever. Lucy the mage, Theo the rogue, Mia the healer, and the adults, who mostly caused trouble. When Grandpa started describing the dragon's lair, everyone leaned in. You enter a vast cavern, Arthur intoned, glittering with treasure. The dragon sleeps upon its hoard, smoke curling from its nostrils. What do you do? Lucy whispered. We sneak. Greg, or rather, Gareth, said. I vote we run. Emily, Alara the enchantress, smiled slyly. Cowardice doesn't suit you, Gareth. Charlie smirked. Ooh. Greg pointed at him. Traitor. Greg's POV. The game had somehow turned into a flirtation, though Greg wasn't sure who started it. Emily had a way of smiling that made every line sound like an invitation, or a challenge. Arthur, of course, noticed everything. Gareth and Alara must combine their powers, he announced grandly. Only together can they open the dragon gate. Emily raised an eyebrow. Combine powers, huh? Arthur coughed into his hand. Strictly narrative necessity. Greg shot him a look. Subtle, Dad. Arthur ignored him. Now roll for synergy. Emily grinned and rolled her die. Natural 20. Arthur gasped. A perfect match. Greg groaned. Unbelievable. Charlie whispered to Lucy. Your grandpa's a genius. Emily's POV. By the time they reached the dragon encounter, everyone was shouting, laughing, and acting out their moves with embarrassing enthusiasm. When the dragon, a hand puppet with googly eyes Arthur had apparently made overnight, appeared, the kids went ballistic. Attack, Charlie yelled. Fireball, Lucy shouted. Arthur, deep-voiced, roared. You dare challenge Smolderfang the Infinite? Greg pointed at the puppet. He's got glitter breath. Arthur puffed air through the puppet's mouth. It's magical mist. Emily couldn't stop laughing. Oh my God, this is ridiculous. Welcome to my childhood, Greg said, grinning. Then, suddenly, and very intentionally, Arthur said, the dragon turns its burning gaze upon Gareth and Alara. You fight as one, it growls. Are you bound by fate, or by love? The table went silent. Greg blinked. Dad, Emily flushed. Arthur. Arthur shrugged innocently. It's canonically relevant. Sherry muttered. You're impossible. Greg sighed, shaking his head. But when he looked at Emily, he saw her smiling, just a little. Like maybe she didn't mind the question. Sherry's POV. Watching her son and Emily was like watching the first act of a romance movie you'd already seen a dozen times. You knew exactly where it was headed, but you couldn't resist cheering anyway. Arthur was laying it on thick, of course, but Sherry could see something genuine underneath the theatrics. Greg's eyes lingered too long. Emily's laughter was softer around him. And Charlie, bless that boy, was thriving. She hadn't seen him this animated, this happy, in years. When the kids finally defeated the dragon, Arthur let out a dramatic death rattle that made everyone collapse into laughter. Even Sherry had to admit it was infectious. Arthur's POV, the heroes had won. The dragon was slain, the treasure recovered, and the pizza was on its way. Arthur surveyed his chaotic kingdom, the glitter, the dice, the shrieking joy, and felt a wave of pride. This, he thought, is what magic is. Not fireballs, not spells, just laughter, connection. The way broken hearts find ways to mend themselves when no one's looking. And if his son needed a little push to find that magic again, well, Arthur was just the man for the job. Greg's POV. Later that night, after everyone left, and Charlie was asleep with his dragon puppet under one arm, Greg found himself sitting on the porch steps with a blanket over his shoulders and his phone glowing softly in his hand. A message from Emily blinked on screen. Thanks for today. Lucy can't stop talking about it. I think you and your dad might actually be wizards. He smiled and typed. We prefer magical consultants. A pause. Then her reply came. You free next Saturday? Lucy wants to plan her next spell. Always. but only if there's coffee involved. Deal. And maybe dessert. He hesitated, then added, dessert's my specialty. I'll hold you to that, Gareth. He laughed quietly. For the first time in a long while, the world felt wide open. Like anything, dragons, love, second chances, might actually be possible. Arthur's epilogue, to himself. That night, Arthur added a note to his campaign log. Session 7. The Dragon's Lair. Victory achieved. Heroes triumphant. Romance pending, but probability high. He smiled, closed the book, and turned off the light. Outside, the autumn wind carried the sound of laughter through the trees, faint, but full of promise. Chapter 6. Critical success. The next week unfolded in a blur of normal life. School runs, grocery lists, half-finished laundry, and one very persistent feeling Greg couldn't quite name. He told himself it was general contentment. Arthur called it smitten. Arthur wasn't wrong. Greg's POV. It started with a phone call from the school. Mr. Ross? This is Ms. Trujillo, the PDA coordinator. I'm calling to confirm your participation in the fall festival this Friday. Greg blinked. My what? Your participation, Ms. Trujillo repeated cheerfully. Arthur Ross signed you up for the Parent Talent Showcase. We're very excited. Greg's stomach dropped. He what? He wrote here. My son is a master storyteller. Will dazzle audiences with his imagination. Greg pinched the bridge of his nose. Of course he did. Ms. Trujillo chuckled. You'll be performing alongside Emily Turner. She's doing a short reading, so it should complement your piece nicely. Greg froze. Wait, Emily Turner? As in yes. You two will make a wonderful pair. He hung up slowly, staring into the middle distance. Somewhere, Arthur was whistling innocently, and Greg could feel it. Arthur's POV. Arthur was not whistling innocently. He was humming the Matchmaker song from Fiddler on the Roof while polishing his dice. Sherry arched an eyebrow. What did you do now? Merely facilitated destiny, he said. Greg and Emily are performing together at the fall festival. Performing? Sherry repeated, unimpressed. Did they agree to that? Eventually, Arthur said. When they find out. Sherry sighed, setting down her teacup. You're going to get punched. Arthur smiled serenely. Worth it. Emily's POV. Emily got the call 20 minutes after Greg did. Oh, how lovely. Ms. Trujillo chirped. Your duet reading with Mr. Ross is confirmed. Emily nearly dropped her phone. My what? We thought it'd be nice. Two of our most creative parents collaborating. It's for a good cause. And your daughter insisted you'd make a great team. Lucy. Of course. When Emily asked her about it that evening, Lucy just grinned. It's for charity. Grandpa Arthur said you'd thank me later. Emily sighed. I'm surrounded by schemers. Lucy's grin widened. Cute schemers. Charlie's POV. Charlie was over the moon. This is going to be epic, he told Lucy on the bus. Our parents doing a show together? They're basically famous. Lucy nodded. We just have to make sure they actually practice. Operation Parent Rehearsal? Operation Parent Rehearsal, she confirmed, spitting on her hand and offering it. Charlie hesitated, then shook. You're weird. Strategically weird. Greg's POV. By Thursday, Greg had given up pretending he wasn't nervous. When Emily arrived at the house to plan their performance, he'd actually vacuumed. He hadn't vacuumed for a guest in years. Emily, for her part, looked equally frazzled, a folder of papers in one hand and coffee in the other. Arthur's a menace, she said by way of greeting. Greg laughed. You too, huh? Apparently we're the headliners. Fantastic. Just what I've always wanted. Public humiliation. She smirked. Don't worry, I'll make us look good. He raised an eyebrow. You're that confident? I've seen you act. You're basically a bard. That's not. Okay, that's fair. They sat at his kitchen table, brainstorming. Eventually, they decided on a short scene. Part storytelling, part improv, something the kids would love. It was set in a fantasy tavern, of course, with Greg as the reluctant hero and Emily as the mysterious sorceress. As they rehearsed, something started happening. Between the laughter, the teasing, and the way Emily kept tucking her hair behind her ear when she smiled, the air around them shifted. At one point, he flubbed a line and she laughed so hard she snorted. He couldn't stop smiling. This is ridiculous, she said, breathless. We're terrible actors. Maybe, he said quietly, but I'm having fun. She looked at him then, really looked. Yeah, she said softly. Me too. Sherry's POV. From the main house, Sherry peered out the window like a spy. Arthur leaned beside her, munching popcorn. They're rehearsing, Sherry whispered. Of course they are, Arthur said. We're geniuses. She swatted him. You're meddlesome. Synonyms, he said. Inside the apartment, Greg and Emily were laughing again, close enough to touch, unaware they were being observed. Sherry smiled. He hasn't laughed like that in years. Arthur's expression softened. He's remembering how. Emily's POV. The night before, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the way Greg had looked at her, like she was something unexpected, something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Lucy was already asleep, clutching her stuffed dragon, but Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. When her phone buzzed, she grabbed it instinctively. Greg, you ready for tomorrow? Emily, depends. You got your costume sorted? Greg, if by costume you mean flannel shirt, then yes. Emily, adventurer chic. Very bold. Greg, you're not nervous? Emily, terrified. But at least I'll have backup. Greg, always. She stared at the message longer than she should have before typing. Emily, you're a good man, Greg. You know that. Greg, trying to be. Emily, you are. Good night, Bard. Greg, good night, sorceress. Her heart did an inconvenient little flip. The fall festival, Friday evening, arrived with fairy lights strung across the school lawn and the smell of apple cider thick in the air. Kids ran in packs, faces painted, arms sticky with caramel. Charlie and Lucy were in charge of the bake sale table, under adult supervision that was mostly theoretical. Arthur wore his dungeon master cloak for ambience. Sherry had brought pumpkin bread and a thermos of hot cocoa, already resigned to babysitting the conspirators. When Greg and Emily stepped on stage, side by side, holding prop scrolls and wearing vaguely medieval accessories Arthur had loaned them, the crowd cheered. Well, Greg muttered under his breath, no pressure. Emily grinned. We slay dragons. We can handle PDA moms. Their little play began as light-hearted banter, the hero and the sorceress arguing over a lost map. But somehow, through the laughter, it turned into something real. When Emily delivered her final line, sometimes, the bravest thing a hero can do is let someone fight beside him. Her eyes met his. And Greg, half in character, half in truth, replied softly, then I'm lucky to have found you. The crowd clapped, laughed, cheered, but Greg barely heard it. Because Emily was still looking at him, and her smile said she'd heard something underneath the script. Charlie's POV, Charlie hooped from the crowd. They did it. That was awesome. Lucy beamed. They're so in love. Charlie made a face. Ew. Lucy elbowed him. You're just jealous you didn't get to be in the play. Yeah, that's totally it. Arthur leaned down behind them. Operation Bardic Romance. Critical success. Greg's POV. After the show, when the festival wound down and the kids were busy devouring leftover cookies, Greg and Emily wandered off toward the school garden, where the string lights glowed soft and low. That was, Greg started. Surprisingly good? Emily finished, smiling. He chuckled. I was going to say not a disaster, but yeah, that works. They sat on a bench, the autumn air cool, but not cold. The noise of the festival faded to a soft hum behind them. You know, Emily said, you were right about your dad's games. They bring people together. He looked at her. Even the unwilling ones. Especially those. Silence stretched, comfortable, and charged all at once. Finally, Emily said, Greg, I didn't think I'd. She stopped, fumbling for words. After everything, I didn't think I'd want this kind of connection again. He nodded. Me neither. She met his eyes. But here we are. Greg smiled softly. Yeah, here we are. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The lights, the music, the smell of cinnamon. And then he leaned forward, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. This kiss wasn't an accident like the last. It was deliberate, warm, certain. And when they finally parted, Emily laughed under her breath. You realize our kids are going to weaponize this. Greg groaned. Oh, absolutely. Arthur's POV. Later that night, Arthur watched from a discreet distance, or what he believed was discreet, as Greg and Emily walked back toward the crowd, hands brushing, shy smiles blooming. Sherry appeared beside him, carrying a paper cup of cider. You spying again? She asked. Monitoring, he said. Happy. Arthur's grin was soft this time. Critical success. She chuckled. You old romantic. Guilty as charged. Emily's POV. End of the night. Lucy was asleep in the car before they'd left the parking lot. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, then at Greg's truck a few cars ahead. Her heart was still doing that infuriating, wonderful flutter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a single mom fighting uphill. She felt part of something. Something messy and unexpected, and very, very good. Greg's POV. At home, Charlie was already in bed, mumbling about dragons in his sleep. Greg stood at the window, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then came the message. Emily, that might have been the most fun I've had in a long time. Thank you. Greg, likewise. Next time, let's skip the stage fright. Emily, you handled it like a pro. Greg, it's easy when your co-star steals the show. Emily, smooth, Mr. Ross. Greg, flattery's a class skill. Emily, good night, Bard. Greg, good night, sorceress. He smiled, put the phone down, and let himself breathe. For the first time in a decade, Greg Ross didn't feel like he was rebuilding his life. He felt like he was living it. Chapter 7, of Quests and Confessions. Saturday dawned like every other game day. The smell of pancakes drifting through the kitchen, the sound of Charlie thundering down the stairs, Arthur humming concerning hobbits in the background. But something was different. For one, Greg was whistling. Sherry's POV, Sherry noticed it first. Her son, her perpetually tired, slightly grumpy, single-father son, was whistling while flipping pancakes. And smiling, that quiet sort of smile that looked like contentment wearing jeans. Someone's in a good mood, she said, setting the table. Just, good coffee, Greg said quickly. Too quickly. Sherry hummed. And I suppose good coffee texts you good night? Greg nearly dropped the spatula. Mom. Arthur wandered in, hair wild and robe askew. Did someone say coffee? Or emotional growth? Both, Sherry said dryly. Apparently our son's in love. Arthur stopped mid-pour. At last, Greg groaned. It's not. It's new, okay? Sherry smiled softly. Then let it be new, sweetheart. Don't rush to explain it. Arthur raised his mug. To new quests. Sherry sighed but clinked hers against his anyway. Emily's POV. Across town, Emily had the same problem. namely, a 10-year-old with no concept of secrecy. So, Lucy said over cereal, "When are you and Mr. Ross getting married?" Emily choked on her coffee. "Lucy, what? You kissed him?" Emily froze. How did you?" Lucy grinned. "Grandpa Arthur says nothing escapes the eyes of destiny." Emily pressed a hand to her forehead. "That man's going to be the end of me." "Technically, he's Mr. Ross's dad," Lucy said helpfully. "So he's already kind of family." But Lucy only giggled. "You're smiling. You like smiling." And Emily couldn't deny it. She'd woken up lighter, happier, like something inside her that had been locked up was finally stretching in the sunlight. Charlie's POV. Charlie had been sworn to secrecy. Unfortunately, secrecy was hard when Lucy Turner had already told half their friend group. "You're not supposed to say anything," he whispered as they set up the game table. "I didn't," Lucy protested. "I just told Mia that our parents like each other," which everyone already knew. "That's not," Charlie stopped. "Okay, fine, they're kind of obvious." Lucy smirked. "Told you." Arthur strolled in carrying a tray of snacks like a medieval innkeeper. "What's this?" "A pre-game council." "Nothing," both kids shouted. Arthur arched an eyebrow. "Suspicious answer." "I approve." Greg's POV. When Emily arrived, Greg was already there, sleeves rolled up, helping Arthur set the maps. "Morning," he said, that word carrying far too much meaning now. "Morning," she replied, just as softly. Their eyes met and lingered. Behind them, Charlie and Lucy whispered dramatically, "They're doing it again." Arthur coughed into his mug. "My cue to roll initiative." Sherry appeared with lemonade. "Everyone behave, or I start singing, 'Can you feel the love tonight?'" Greg groaned. "Mom." Emily tried not to laugh. "They're worse than the kids." Sherry winked. "We've had more practice." The game begins. Arthur, ever the showman, dimmed the lights slightly and announced, "Today, brave adventurers, we face the aftermath of the dragon's fall." Lucy whispered to Charlie, "Symbolism much?" Charlie nodded. "Grandpa's sneaky." The kids dove into the session, fighting goblins, solving riddles, shouting over each other like caffeinated bards. But Arthur had a subplot planned. Halfway through the session, the group discovered a mysterious heartstone, a magical gem that glowed brighter whenever two adventurers worked in harmony. Of course, Arthur made sure Greg's and Emily's characters held it. "Gareth and Alara must carry the heartstone together," he intoned. "Its magic is delicate, fueled by trust and mutual affection." Emily bit her lip, trying not to laugh. "Mutual what?" Arthur coughed. "Canonically relevant." "Dad," Greg warned. Arthur waved him off. "Now, the heartstone senses hesitation. You must prove your connection. Roll, both of you, for empathy." Lucy whispered, "I love this game." They rolled. Greg's die, 18. Emily's, 19. Arthur threw up his hands. Critical connection. The heartstone glows with blinding light. Sherry clapped quietly. "Bravo." Charlie grinned. "I told you. They're a perfect match." Greg covered his face. "I'm never living this down." Emily's POV, as ridiculous as it was, Emily couldn't help feeling warm. Every laugh, every shared glance, it was all so easy with Greg. For someone who'd built her life on routines and control, that ease was terrifying and wonderful. When the session ended and the kids ran off to the yard to practice sword fighting, Arthur began clearing the table with exaggerated innocence. "You know," he said, "the heartstone represents more than power. It's about courage, vulnerability, letting someone in." Greg gave him a look. "You rehearsed that, didn't you?" Arthur smirked. "Everything's rehearsal." Emily smiled. "You should put that on a mug." Sherry appeared beside her husband, looping an arm through his. "Don't encourage him, dear." Arthur whispered loudly. "Encouragement received." Greg groaned. "I need to move." Charlie's POV. In the yard, Charlie and Lucy were dueling with foam swords. Lucy, as usual, was narrating dramatically. "Sir Chucklehelm faces his greatest challenge yet," she declared. "The truth beast." "That's not a thing," Charlie said. "It is now." She swung. "The beast feeds on secrets." Charlie blocked and laughed. "You're weird." Lucy shrugged. "Maybe. But if your dad and my mom get married, I'm picking your room." "Wait, what?" Lucy grinned. "You heard me." Charlie dropped his sword. "No way. That'd be weird." "Would it?" she asked. "Or kinda cool." Charlie thought about it. About movie nights and adventures, and having someone else who knew all the same grown-ups. He shrugged. "Maybe kinda cool." Lucy smirked. "Knew it." Greg's POV. Later, after the kids had gone home and Arthur had fallen asleep in his armchair, still wearing his cloak, Greg found himself outside with Emily again. The air smelled like pine and smoke from a distant chimney. "Sorry about them," Greg said. "My family's a lot." Emily smiled. "They're wonderful." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not used to this. To anyone fitting into all of it so easily." She tilted her head. "You mean me?" He met her eyes. "Yeah, you." The porch light caught her hair, made her look like a memory he didn't want to forget. "You know," she said softly, "I'm not sure I fit anywhere easily. But with you, and Charlie, it doesn't feel like I'm forcing anything." He exhaled slowly. "That's exactly it." They stood there, the world quiet around them. Somewhere inside, Sherry was humming off-key. A car passed on the distant road. "Greg," Emily said finally, "this thing, whatever we're building, it's scaring me a little." He nodded. "Same. But I don't want to stop." "Good," he said, smiling faintly. "Because neither do I." She stepped closer, and he brushed her hair from her face. I can't promise perfect, he said. I can just promise honest. That's all I want, she said. And when she leaned into him, it wasn't a fairy tale moment. It was quieter than that. Two tired, hopeful hearts finding the same rhythm. Arthur's POV. Inside, Arthur cracked one eye open from the recliner, saw them through the window, and grinned. Called it, he murmured. Sherry's voice drifted from the kitchen. What's that, dear? Nothing, he said, closing his eyes again. Just rolling a natural 20. Charlie's POV. Later that night, Charlie peeked out his bedroom window and saw his dad and Emily talking on the porch. No yelling, no awkward silence, just peace. He smiled. He didn't fully understand what was happening between them, but he knew one thing. His dad was happy. Really happy. He whispered into the dark, "Good job, Grandpa." Emily's POV. Midnight, back home, Emily found a note in Lucy's handwriting taped to her bedroom door. It read, "Dear Mom, if you marry Mr. Ross, can I be the flower mage? Love, Lucy." Emily laughed so hard she had to sit down. Then she texted Greg. Emily, your dad's not the only schemer in this family. Greg, oh no. What did they do? Emily, Lucy just proposed a wedding role for herself. Greg, already? We haven't even had a second date. Emily, technically we've had 3, if you count dragon fights. Greg, those absolutely count. Emily, then, when's the next quest? Greg, how's next Saturday? Emily, perfect. I'll bring the snacks. Greg, I'll bring the heartstone. She smiled, heart full and impossibly light. Arthur's epilogue. Arthur updated his campaign log one final time that night. Session 8. The Hearthstone Quest. Heroes victorious. Dragons vanquished. Bonds strengthened. Love confirmed. Notes. Must bake celebratory pie. Sherry prefers apple. Greg prefers denial. Emily prefers him anyway. He closed the book, turned off the light, and murmured to himself. Every story needs a little magic. Sometimes, you just have to roll for it. Chapter 8. The Family Quest. The following week, the Ross household was in chaos, but the good kind. Sherry was setting extra places at the dining table, humming to herself. Arthur was fussing over candles. Charlie was trying to supervise dessert while sneaking spoonfuls of whipped cream. Greg had been conscripted into kitchen duty. Again, tonight was the dinner. The official blending of the adventuring parties, as Arthur had called it. Translation. Emily and Lucy were coming over for a proper family meal. Greg's POV. Greg stirred the mashed potatoes and tried not to think too hard about what tonight meant. It was just dinner. That's all. Families eat together all the time. Families who might someday become one family. Oh no. He took a deep breath and focused on the potatoes. At least potatoes didn't expect emotional vulnerability. Stop overthinking, Sherry said, appearing beside him with her magical mom intuition. It's just dinner. He sighed. That's what I keep telling myself. She smiled gently. Greg, I know it's been a long road, but it's okay to let yourself enjoy something that's going right. He glanced toward the living room, where Arthur was arranging the tabletop map like it was the Sistine Chapel. Define going right, Greg muttered. Sherry laughed. Arthur's just excited. He says it's tradition to share stories after a meal. Uh-huh. And by stories, you mean dice. Probably. Emily's POV. Emily was having her own small panic attack, the kind you get when meeting the parents for real. Mom, you're fine, Lucy said for the 20th time. You already know them. Knowing someone as your kid's game hosts is different from dinner. You'll be great, Lucy said, adjusting her mom's scarf with exaggerated care. Just be you. The nice, pretty, slightly weird version. Emily laughed. Slightly weird. Yeah, the fun kind. As they pulled up the long driveway, the house glowed with warm light, and the smell of garlic bread drifted out to meet them. Lucy grinned. Smells like family. Emily's throat tightened. Yeah, she whispered. It really does. Arthur's POV. Arthur opened the door before Greg could. Welcome, my dear adventurers, he declared, gesturing grandly. Enter our humble stronghold. Emily laughed. You're really committing to the theme. Arthur winked. I find commitment improves immersion. Lucy bounded past him. Hi, Mr. Ross. Hi, Charlie. Oh wow, mashed potatoes. Arthur leaned toward Emily and whispered. We bribed them with carbohydrates. Effective strategy. Dinner was lively. Charlie and Lucy narrated their week like rival podcasters. Sherry kept offering second helpings. Arthur insisted on a toast. To quests. To family. To suspiciously coincidental romance. Greg groaned into his water glass. Emily choked on her wine. Sherry smacked Arthur's arm. What? Arthur said innocently. It's thematic. But as the evening went on, the awkwardness dissolved into laughter. Emily told stories about Lucy's obsession with fantasy novels. Greg shared how Charlie once tried to camp in the laundry room because it had the best acoustics. Arthur laughed so hard he nearly tipped his chair. And through it all, Greg kept catching Emily's gaze. Those quiet, shared glances that said this feels right. Charlie's POV. Charlie loved when the house was full like this. Everyone talking, eating, laughing. It felt big and warm. He leaned toward Lucy and whispered, I think it's working. Lucy smirked. Obviously. Look at them. Sure enough, Greg and Emily were sitting close enough that their elbows touched when they reached for the salt. Neither pulled away. Lucy grinned. Mission accomplished. Charlie frowned thoughtfully. Do we still get to roll dice after? Duh, she said. It's game night and love night. Don't ever say that again. Arthur's POV. When the plates were cleared and dessert half devoured, Arthur brought out the game board. Just a short session, he promised. Something light to digest by. The kids cheered. Sherry sighed fondly. Emily looked amused. Greg looked resigned. Arthur began in his best narrator voice. The party gathers in the ancient Hall of Hearths, where a new quest awaits. One not of dragons or dungeons, but of truth. The kids leaned in. The oracle speaks, Arthur continued. Before the next dawn, each adventurer must reveal one truth they have hidden, not to win treasure, but to earn trust. Emily's brow arched. Subtle, Arthur. He winked. I thought so. The game, the kids went first. Charlie confessed he'd once replaced all the Monopoly money with Pokemon cards. Lucy admitted she sometimes peeked at Arthur's notes when he wasn't looking for strategy. Laughter erupted. Then it was Greg's turn. He rolled, his die landing perfectly on 20. Arthur smiled. Oh, fate demands honesty. Greg exhaled slowly. All right, truth is, I didn't expect any of this. The game, the kids, this. He gestured around the table. I thought I'd just work, raise Charlie, and keep things simple. Emily's gaze softened. But somewhere along the way, Greg continued, I realized simple isn't always what you need. Sometimes you need messy, and laughter, and people who make you forget you're supposed to be sad. The room went very still. Arthur's voice, usually booming, came out quiet. That's a good truth, son. Greg smiled faintly. Your turn, old man. Arthur rolled the die. 19. He sat back, eyes shining. My truth? I started this game again because I missed it. Not the dice or the dragons. The sound of this. People at the table. Stories being told. You all laughing. He looked at Greg, then Sherry, then the kids. I wanted to build something together before time runs out. Sherry's hand covered his. Arthur. He smiled. Don't worry, I'm not dying. Just getting sentimental in my old age. The kids giggled, tension dissolving. Then Emily rolled. 17. She hesitated. My truth. Her voice softened. I was afraid to let Lucy see me fail. Afraid that if I tried something new, or let someone in, she'd think I was weak. But then, I met all of you, and I realized that being brave isn't about fighting dragons. It's about letting people see you. Greg's chest ached. She met his eyes. Even when it's scary. Arthur clapped his hands. And that, my friends, is the real treasure. Sherry's POV. After the kids scampered off to watch a movie, Sherry lingered at the kitchen doorway, watching her son and Emily laugh quietly as they cleaned up the table. Arthur slid his arm around her shoulders. Worked out, didn't it? He murmured. Sherry smiled. You meddled your way into something beautiful. He squeezed her hand. I just rolled the dice. They chose love. Emily's POV. Later that night, it was late when Emily and Lucy finally got ready to leave. Greg walked them out to the driveway. The night air was cool, scented with pine and faint wood smoke. The kind of air that made promises. Thanks for dinner, Emily said. And for everything. Greg smiled. Thanks for not running screaming. She laughed softly. Tempting, but no. They stood there for a moment, neither quite wanting to say goodnight. You know, she said finally, I think Arthur's right. About what? Every story needs a little magic. Greg chuckled. Yeah, guess we found some. He leaned in. Not a surprise this time, not a question. Just a kiss that said this is where I want to be. When they broke apart, Emily whispered. So what happens next? He smiled. Next, we roll. Arthur's POV. Epilogue of the night. Arthur sat by the fire after everyone had gone. The house was quiet now, soft with the echoes of laughter. He picked up his campaign notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, Session 9. The family quest completed. Secrets shared. Hearts opened. Future uncertain, but bright. Notes, love grows best around full tables. Also, do not let Charlie near the whipped cream unsupervised. He closed the book and smiled. Good game, he whispered to the empty room. And somewhere upstairs, the sound of his family's laughter drifted down, like dice rolling, soft and infinite. Chapter 9. A Roll of the Heart. It started as an ordinary Saturday. Charlie was inventing a new house rule for the game. Critical hits give you bonus snacks. Lucy was rolling her eyes fondly, and Sherry was rearranging the living room like she was preparing for royalty. Greg was late, as usual, because Emily had invited him and Charlie over for breakfast first. Emily's POV. Is this too much? Emily asked, staring at the stack of pancakes, fresh fruit, and suspiciously fancy whipped cream. Lucy shrugged. Depends. Are you trying to feed them or impress them? Emily gave her a look. Both. Lucy grinned. Then it's just enough. When Greg and Charlie arrived, the morning light caught on Greg's smile. That quiet, easy grin Emily had started recognizing as her favorite part of the day. Wow, Greg said, surveying the spread. You're spoiling us. Call it an experiment in hospitality, Emily said lightly. Charlie eyed the table. Can we start experimenting now? They all laughed, and for a while, everything was perfect. Pancakes, bad jokes, Lucy and Charlie whispering conspiratorially. Until Arthur didn't show up. Greg's POV. Arthur never missed a Saturday. By noon, Greg was worried. He called the main house twice before Sherry finally answered. Breathless, voice tight. Greg, it's your father. Everything inside him went still. Arthur's POV. Arthur hated hospitals. Too cold, too sterile, too quiet. The last time he'd been in one for himself was 15 years ago, after a mild heart episode. Now here he was again, monitors beeping in perfect rhythm. Sherry perched beside him like a sentinel. I told you, she said softly, brushing his hand. You pushed too hard. Arthur smiled faintly. I was narrating, not pushing. You were narrating while carrying firewood. He chuckled, then winced. Semantics. When Greg burst through the door moments later, breathless and pale, Arthur tried to wave him off. Hey, sport. Don't look so grim. I'm still rolling 20s. Greg exhaled shakily, grabbing his dad's hand. You scared the hell out of us. Arthur's smile softened. That means you still care. Sherry swatted his arm gently. Of course we care, you old fool. He turned his hand to cover hers. Lucky fool. Emily's POV. Emily waited with the kids in the hallway, trying to keep them calm. Lucy fidgeted beside Charlie, whispering, He's gonna be okay, right? Charlie nodded firmly. Yeah, he's tough. He once ate expired salsa. Emily blinked. That's comforting. He shrugged. It was really expired. When Sherry finally stepped into the hallway, Emily saw the relief in her eyes before she said anything. He's stable, Sherry said, voice trembling with exhaustion and gratitude. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Charlie exhaled loudly. Lucy squeezed his hand. Can we see him? Charlie asked. Just for a minute, Sherry said. Quietly. Charlie's POV. The room smelled weird, like soap and machines, but Grandpa looked like himself again. Hey, kiddo, Arthur said, smiling faintly. Don't worry. The dragon missed. Charlie climbed up on the chair beside him. You're not allowed to scare us like that. Noted, Arthur said. Next time I'll schedule my collapse in advance. Charlie didn't laugh this time. I mean it. Arthur looked at him, something soft in his eyes. You're right. I'm sorry, pal. Then he reached over and tousled Charlie's hair. But you'll take care of the quest if I'm out of commission, right? Charlie smiled weakly. Yeah, but you still have to DM from heaven if you go. Arthur chuckled. Deal. Greg's POV. That night, after making sure Sherry had eaten and the kids were settled in the waiting room with snacks, Greg and Emily sat side by side outside Arthur's hospital room. Greg's voice was low. He looks smaller somehow. Emily leaned closer. He's still himself, Greg. Still that impossible mix of wisdom and chaos. Greg laughed softly. That's him all right. A long silence passed. Then Emily said, You know, when Lucy's dad left, I used to come home from work and just sit in the dark. I told myself I was being strong. But really, I was just scared. Greg looked at her. Of what? Of letting anyone see how much it hurt, she said quietly. Of trying again. Because what if it breaks all over again? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. She turned to him. So how do we do this, Greg? How do we be us, when life keeps throwing curveballs? He reached over, fingers brushing hers. We keep rolling. She smiled through tears. Even when the odds are bad. Especially then. Arthur's POV, he wasn't asleep. Not really. He could hear them through the thin hospital door, Greg's quiet murmur, Emily's soft laugh. It made him smile. He'd worried about leaving his son alone too long in that sadness. Worried that Greg had mistaken endurance for peace. But now, hearing that laugh, he knew better. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, critical success. Sherry's POV. When she finally coaxed Arthur to rest, Sherry sat for a while, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. They'd been through 50 years together. The easy, the impossible, the deeply mundane. She smiled, thinking of how he'd always said life was a campaign. You roll the dice, he'd tell her, and hope you've got good party members. She reached for his hand, whispered, still rolling, love. Emily's POV. The morning after, Arthur was released the next afternoon, armed with new medication and a strict, no heroics order. Sherry fussed. Charlie hovered. Arthur grumbled, but secretly looked pleased with the attention. Emily and Lucy came over with flowers, and a casserole Sherry immediately declared too perfect to be store-bought. I might have cheated, Emily confessed, but it's the thought that counts. Arthur patted her hand. You're officially part of the guild now. Lucy beamed. So she gets XP? Arthur winked. Plenty. Greg's POV. Later that evening, when things had settled, Sherry making tea, Arthur half dozing in his chair, the kids watching a movie, Greg and Emily stepped out to the porch again. The sunset was soft and gold, washing over the yard like honey. You okay? Emily asked. He nodded. Better now? I thought we were going to lose him. She touched his arm gently. You didn't. He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. When Mom called, I realized if something had happened, there were things I never said. To him. To you. Emily's breath caught. To me? He nodded. Yeah. He stepped closer. I don't want to wait around anymore, hoping life gives me a perfect moment. I just want to build something real, with you. With the kids. With all of it. Her eyes filled. Greg. He smiled softly. You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that I'm all in. She shook her head, not in refusal, but disbelief, emotion trembling in her voice. You have the worst timing. He grinned. Story of my life. She laughed through her tears and pulled him into a hug. A long, steady, grounding hug that said I'm here. Charlie's POV. Charlie peeked out the window just in time to see his dad and Emily hugging. He grinned and whispered to Lucy. Called it. Lucy nodded sagely. Love quest, complete. Charlie frowned. You think they'll get married? Lucy shrugged. Probably. But we still get joint snack privileges either way. Sweet. Arthur's POV. A week later, Arthur's recovery was slow but steady. When Saturday rolled around, he insisted on running a short session for morale. This time, his voice was softer but no less dramatic. Our heroes stand before the final gate, he said. It does not open for gold or glory, only for truth and love. Emily and Greg exchanged a look. Charlie whispered, subtle as always. Arthur continued. They must decide if they walk this road together, not as adventurers, but as a family. He gestured to Greg. Your roll, my boy. Greg rolled the die. It clattered across the table, spun, and landed, perfectly, improbably, on 20. Arthur grinned. Of course. Greg looked at Emily, smiling. Guess the dice decided. She rolled 2. Another 20. The kids erupted in cheers. Arthur threw his arms up. The gods approve. Sherry laughed, tears in her eyes. You old romantic. Arthur winked. Just finishing the campaign. Emily's POV. Later that night, when the house finally quieted and the kids were asleep, Greg walked her to her car. You realize your dad just officiated our relationship using dice, Emily said, smiling. Seems fitting, Greg replied. She leaned against the car door. So what now? He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Now, we see where the next chapter takes us. She smiled. Together? He squeezed her hand. Always. She kissed him then, under the porch light. A kiss that felt like a promise, not a question. Arthur's journal. Epilogue. Session 10. The roll of the heart. Heroes united. Dice honest. Family victorious. Notes. Love is the best kind of critical hit. Next session TBD, possibly a wedding side quest. Must consult Sherry. He closed the journal, smiling to himself as Sherry's voice floated from the kitchen. Arthur, are you writing again? Just wrapping up the campaign, he called back. Well, she said, appearing in the doorway with a soft smile. Save a page for the sequel. He reached for her hand. Always. Chapter 10, Side Quests and Second Chances, Greg's POV. 2 months after the Great Dice Declaration, life had become a carefully organized sort of chaos. Every Saturday, the heroes of Halver, as Arthur now insisted on calling them, met at the Ross house for their campaign. Every Sunday, Greg found himself in Emily's kitchen, helping make brunch while Lucy and Charlie planned side quests for the following week. He couldn't tell if he and Emily were dating or accidentally married by proximity. They hadn't said the word love again since that night under the porch light. They didn't need to. It was there, in her laugh, in his instinct to reach for her hand without thinking, in the way their kids looked at them like the world had finally tilted the right way. Emily's POV, it was the small things that undid her. Greg helping Lucy with her math homework, badly, but with so much patience she wanted to kiss him for it. Greg leaving coffee on her porch when she worked late. Greg fixing her porch light, even though she swore she could do it herself, she could not. One morning, she caught herself humming while folding laundry and froze. It was the same tune Lucy used to hum when she was little and happy, when her world still felt safe. She smiled softly. Maybe this was what safety felt like again. Arthur's POV. Arthur had taken to light demang from his recliner while Sherry monitored his blood pressure. He was supposed to be retired from both heroics and heavy lifting, but that didn't stop him from orchestrating an elaborate campaign called the Wedding of the Silver Knight. Purely hypothetical, he told Greg one night, with a wink that could melt steel. Greg had groaned. Dad, stop matchmaking. Arthur feigned innocence. Matchmaking? Me? I'm simply weaving narrative destiny. Sherry leaned in from the kitchen. He's been practicing the vows. Arthur didn't even blink. Research. Charlie's POV. Charlie loved that life felt like an adventure again. He and Lucy were now junior co-DMS, which mostly meant they invented ridiculous side missions, like rescuing a talking chicken or retrieving a cursed sandwich. But what Charlie liked most was seeing his dad smile. Not the polite smile for teachers or other parents. The real one, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Sometimes, he'd catch his dad watching Emily when she laughed. And Charlie would think, yeah, that's the good kind of magic. Greg's POV. On a Thursday evening in late spring, Greg stood in front of his mirror, wearing a button-up shirt that might have been ironed once, possibly in another decade. He was heading to dinner at Emily's, just the two of them this time. No kids, no dice, no parents, just them. He hadn't been on an actual date in years. He'd faced parent-teacher meetings, tax season, and 10-year-olds with Nerf guns, but somehow, this felt scarier. Arthur had grinned when Greg told him, just remember, son, romance is like a campaign. You never know if you're walking into a tavern or a trap. Comforting, Greg muttered. Arthur handed him a small red die. For luck. Greg laughed. Dad, I can't take your D20. Arthur's smile softened. You're not taking it. You're borrowing it. You'll know when to roll it. Greg pocketed the die, not knowing how prophetic that would be. Emily's POV. Dinner went perfectly. Almost. The food was good, the candles didn't catch fire, and Greg didn't spill anything. Though he came close when she said, you clean up well. Then came dessert. And with dessert came the topic she hadn't meant to bring up. So, Lucy's dad called last week. Greg froze halfway through a bite of pie. Oh, yeah, she said, trying to sound casual. He's moving back to the States. He wants to see her. Greg nodded slowly, careful, calm. How do you feel about that? I don't know, Emily admitted. Part of me thinks it's good. She deserves to know him. But another part. She sighed. I hate that it still hurts. Greg set down his fork and reached across the table, taking her hand. You don't owe him forgiveness, Em. You just owe Lucy honesty. She blinked hard. You're too good at this. Single-parent empathy club, he said softly. We've got lifetime membership. She laughed through a tear. I'm glad you're in it with me. He squeezed her hand. Me too. And just like that, the tension eased, replaced by something deeper. Something steady. Greg's POV. They sat on her porch afterward, the spring air humming with quiet. You know, he said, looking at the stars, I think we make a pretty good team. Emily smiled. We do. He glanced at her, teasing. Even if your initiative rolls are trash. She gasped. Excuse me. Remember session 2? You rolled a 1 and fell into a pit trap. You told me to check for traps. You poked the floor with your sword. I was being proactive. They both burst into laughter, that helpless, ridiculous kind that leaves you breathless. When the laughter faded, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You really are something else. And you, she said softly, are full of surprises. Then she kissed him, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that felt like finding home after being lost for too long. Arthur's POV. Arthur knew something had changed the moment Greg walked in the next morning. He didn't have to ask. His son's grin said it all. So, Arthur said casually, flipping through his campaign notes. How was your side quest? Greg laughed. Successful. Arthur nodded, satisfied. I thought so. You're glowing like a cleric after a long rest. Sherry leaned in, smiling. He's happy, Arthur. Let him glow. Arthur winked. Oh, I am. I'm just noting it for the campaign log. Emily's POV. 2 weeks later, the ex showed up. Mark, handsome, polished, and carrying flowers like a peace offering. He smiled the same smile that used to melt her, before it had turned hollow. Lucy watched him warily from the living room. Emily took a deep breath. You can visit. But understand, this is her home now, and you don't get to rewrite the past. Mark nodded, subdued. I know. I just want to make things right. After he left, Lucy came over, eyes wide. Do I have to like him? Emily crouched down. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. You just have to be kind. Okay. Lucy nodded slowly. Okay, but can we still have game night Saturday? Emily smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Charlie's POV. That Saturday session was legendary. Grandpa Arthur introduced a mysterious stranger, NPC clearly based on Lucy's dad, who immediately got turned into a frog by a vengeful sorceress, played by Sherry. Poetic justice, Lucy whispered, grinning. Charlie snorted. You're gonna get grounded. Worth it. Greg shot Arthur a look. Dad. Arthur shrugged innocently. The dice decide, son. Greg's POV. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house quieted, Greg found Arthur in his study, sketching out new maps. You're incorrigible, Greg said, smiling. Arthur chuckled. I'm a storyteller. I tell the truth with better lighting. Greg sat beside him. Thanks, Dad. For everything. Arthur looked up. You're thanking me for meddling? For reminding me how to live? Greg said quietly. Arthur's eyes softened. You did that yourself, son. I just handed you the dice. Emily's POV. 1 month later, life wasn't perfect. It was messy, and that was perfect enough. Lucy met her dad for coffee a few times. It went fine. Not amazing, not awful, just fine. And that was progress. Greg and Emily started splitting weekends, blending routines until their lives overlapped like puzzle pieces. The kids called it shared XP. Sherry, ever the organizer, had started referring to Emily as family, and Arthur had been mysteriously pricing wedding venues online. When Greg found out, Arthur claimed it was for campaign research. Nobody believed him. Greg's POV. The anniversary, a full year after Charlie found that dusty box in the attic, Greg stood in the same place, holding that same red dye his father had lent him. Everyone was there. Arthur, Sherry, the kids, and Emily, gathered in the backyard under twinkling lights. Charlie handed him a small gift box. It's from Grandpa, he said, grinning. Inside was a note in Arthur's handwriting. Every great hero needs a quest. Yours began with this role. Don't stop playing. Dad Greg looked up at his family, the laughter, the chaos, the love, and felt something deep settle in his chest. Emily stepped beside him, smiling. You okay? He nodded. Better than okay. Then he reached into his pocket, held up the red die, and said, let's roll for the next adventure. She laughed, tears in her eyes. Together? Always. He rolled the die. It landed on 20. Arthur raised his glass. Critical success. And the backyard erupted in laughter, the kind that echoed through the night, warm and bright and infinite. Chapter 11. The Wedding of the Silver Knight. Arthur's campaign log. Entry number 42. Objective. Celebrate union of Sir Gregory the Steadfast and Lady Amelia of the Bright Smile. Secondary objectives. 1. Prevent fire. 2. Keep Sherry from inviting her entire book club. 3. Remind Charlie that dragons are not appropriate ring bearers. Greg's POV. Greg had known Arthur was planning something ever since his dad started referring to the backyard as the venue. What he hadn't expected was to walk outside one Saturday morning and find a full-blown medieval village in progress. Sherry directed traffic with a clipboard. Charlie and Lucy painted cardboard castle walls. Arthur sat on a throne-shaped lawn chair, dictating orders like a benevolent tyrant. Dad, Greg said, blinking. What is this? Arthur beamed. The wedding of the Silver Knight, of course. We're not. Dad, we're not even engaged. Arthur waved that off. Minor narrative delay. The prophecy says it must occur before midsummer. Emily appeared behind him carrying coffee and looking far too calm. I tried to stop them, she said. But your mother threatened to forge the invitations herself. Sherry called. I already did. Greg looked at Emily. She shrugged, grinning. Well, she said. We did say we'd roll with whatever came next. He groaned. You had to quote me, didn't you? Emily's POV. 3 days later she was standing in front of her closet, staring at the wedding dress. It was technically Sherry's old cream-colored sundress, augmented with a silver belt, sparkly fabric glue, and Lucy's artistic zeal. Lucy twirled beside her in a lavender bridesmaid gown made of tulle and ambition. Mom, she said seriously, today you become a level 20 spouse. Emily laughed. Is that higher than a level 20 parent? Way harder, Lucy declared. Less snack breaks. Charlie's POV. Charlie had taken his job as ring bearer very seriously. He'd built a tiny wooden chest, stained it mahogany, and lined it with purple velvet. Inside rested 2 silver bands engraved with tiny dice symbols. His idea, naturally. Symbolism, he explained to Lucy. They're rolling together forever. Lucy rolled her eyes but smiled. You're a sap. He smirked. You love it. Arthur's POV. Arthur surveyed the backyard masterpiece. Garlands of white and silver, folding chairs tied with ribbons, a banner that read the wedding of the Silver Knight and the Lady of Light. It looked ridiculous. It looked perfect. He coughed once, quietly. Sherry was on him instantly with a glass of water. You sure you're up for this? She asked. Arthur smiled. My boy's getting married. Wild horses couldn't keep me in that recliner. She squeezed his hand. I adore you. He winked. Good. Because you're my raid partner for life. Greg's POV. Pre-ceremony. By the time guests arrived, mostly friends, family, and an alarming number of Arthur's retired D&D buddies. Greg had resigned himself to the absurdity. Arthur insisted on officiating. Sherry ran logistics. The kids were stage managers. Greg just tried to breathe. Then Emily walked out the sliding glass door. Sunlight hit her like a spotlight. Simple dress, hair down, eyes bright with mischief. He forgot every joke he'd rehearsed. Arthur cleared his throat behind him. Son, close your mouth. You'll catch flies. Greg laughed shakily. Yeah, right. The ceremony, Arthur raised his cane like a scepter. Friends, family, adventurers. We gather to witness the binding of 2 noble souls, whose hit points shall henceforth be shared. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Emily's cheeks flushed. Greg reached for her hand. It trembled slightly, and he squeezed. Arthur continued. Once upon a roll of fate, a lonely knight found treasure not of gold, but of heart. And a brave lady, weary from old battles, found laughter again. Together they forged a new campaign, complete with snacks. Sherry dabbed at her eyes. Charlie whispered, Grandpa's killing it. Arthur smiled down at them. Now, before the exchange of rings, the couple must complete a sacred trial. The test of cooperation. Everyone groaned affectionately. Greg muttered, You've got to be kidding. Arthur gestured grandly. Behold, the knot of destiny. 2 ribbons, 1 silver and 1 white, were tangled on a small table. The couple must untie the knot without letting go of each other's hands, Arthur intoned. Symbolic of how love requires teamwork and occasionally patience. Greg and Emily exchanged a look equal parts disbelief and delight. Okay, Emily said, let's do this. 5 minutes, 3 failed strategies, and 1 burst of uncontrollable laughter later, they finally freed the ribbons. Arthur declared, they have passed the test. The crowd cheered. The vows, Arthur sobered, voice softening. Gregory Ross, do you promise to continue this grand adventure? To love, to listen, and to occasionally let her win initiative? Greg's smile trembled. I do. And Emily Carter, do you promise to keep your heart open, your courage high, and your sense of humor ready when life crits you? Emily laughed, tears sparkling. I absolutely do. Arthur nodded. Then exchange your rings, and may your rolls forever be lucky. They slid the rings onto each other's fingers. The silver dice caught the sun. Arthur lifted his hands. By the power vested in me by the Guild of Dungeon Masters, I now pronounce you partners in quest and life. You may, Charlie shouted, kiss already. So they did. Cheered on by family, friends, and 2 kids who pretended not to giggle but totally did. Reception, Emily's POV. The reception was pure, glorious chaos. Arthur's friends formed a lute and kazoo band. Sherry's book club handled catering. We made 3 kinds of lasagna. It's symbolic. Charlie and Lucy performed a comedy skit reenacting the couple's first date, complete with terrible accents. Emily leaned against Greg, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Remind me to never underestimate them again. He grinned. They're your fault. They're our fault, she corrected, threading her fingers through his. Then Sherry clinked a glass. Speech. Arthur tried to stand. Sherry made him stay seated. He cleared his throat anyway. I have witnessed many campaigns, he said, voice warm and steady. Some filled with monsters, some with miracles, but none finer than the one my family has built. Love isn't about slaying dragons. It's about choosing to keep adventuring together, even when the map runs out. Silence followed. Then applause. Then hugs. Then more lasagna. Charlie's POV. Halfway through dessert, Charlie caught Lucy sneaking a handful of frosting. Hey, you're supposed to save that for the cake cutting. Lucy grinned, mouth full. I'm stress eating for emotional reasons. Charlie laughed. We did it, you know. We made them happy. She looked at him, frosting on her nose. Guess that means the campaign's over. He shook his head. Nah. Sequel. Greg's POV. Later, when the guests finally trickled home and the fairy lights glowed soft across the yard, Greg found Arthur alone at the edge of the porch. Dad? He said quietly. You pulled it off. Arthur smiled, weary but radiant. Told you the prophecy would be fulfilled. Thank you, Greg said. For everything. Arthur patted his hand. Just remember, son, love is the only adventure that keeps leveling up. He looked out across the lawn, where Sherry danced slowly with Charlie to an old swing song. Not bad for a home campaign, Arthur murmured. Emily's POV. Midnight. When the last plate was washed and the kids were asleep on the couch, Emily stepped onto the porch. Greg joined her, Tuck's jacket slung over one shoulder, hair a delightful mess. Well, she said, that was the weirdest, most wonderful wedding I've ever been to. He laughed. Same. I didn't even know we were engaged this morning. Spontaneity suits us. He brushed her cheek with his thumb. You suit me. They stood quietly, the hum of crickets and distant laughter wrapping around them. Then Greg pulled the red die from his pocket, the one Arthur had given him months ago. Should we roll for luck? He asked. She smiled. Let's. They tossed it together. It bounced once, twice, and landed on 20. Greg laughed. Of course. Emily kissed him. Critical success. Arthur's journal. Final entry. Campaign complete. Heroes. Greg and Emily, Charlie and Lucy, Sherry and me. Final outcome. Love triumphs. Snacks abundant. Notes. Never underestimate the power of a curious child in an attic. He set down the pen, folded the journal shut, and smiled. Outside, laughter drifted through the night, the kind that promised new stories waiting to be told. Sherry curled beside him. Happy ending? Arthur nodded. For now, every good saga leaves room for another chapter. Epilogue. Charlie's POV. A week later, Charlie climbed back into the attic. The old box sat where it had been a year ago, lid open, the scent of dust and adventure lingering. He lifted the red die, now faintly worn from so much use, and grinned. Guess we should start a new campaign. Lucy's voice floated up from below. Only if there are dragons. He pocketed the die. Oh, there will be. Then he bounded down the stairs, ready for whatever quest came next. Bonus epilogue. The next campaign, 5 years later, Saturday nights at the Ross house were loud. Not family dinner loud. Not even Arthur telling one of his war stories loud. We're talking teenagers playing tabletop games loud. Charlie, now 15, had claimed the attic as his creative studio. He'd strung fairy lights across the beams, built a makeshift table from an old door, and somehow convinced everyone to call him Dungeon Master Supreme. Lucy, sitting cross-legged beside him with a notebook full of doodles and snacks, muttered, You're only the supreme one because you have the biggest handwriting. Charlie adjusted his DM screen dramatically. Silence, mortal bard. The campaign begins. From downstairs came Greg's voice. You two better not summon anything real up there again. Charlie yelled back. That was one minor fireball. Emily called. It melted the toaster, sweetheart. Charlie grinned. Details. Greg's POV. Greg leaned against the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, listening to the thumps and laughter above. Remember when we thought our game nights were chaotic? He asked. Emily laughed. Ours had lasagna and controlled dialogue. Theirs has memes and battle soundtracks. True, Greg said. Also less kissing. Emily raised an eyebrow. You hope. Greg choked on his coffee. Don't say that. Arthur, now 74 and smugly immortal, shuffled in with a grin. Relax, son. If anything happens, I've got a protection from teen romance spell ready. Sherry followed with a tray of brownies. Arthur, you can't cast pastries. Arthur winked. Watch me. Upstairs, Charlie's POV. Okay. Charlie announced. The dragon's tail smashes through the bridge. What do you do? Lucy jumped up, pointing her pencil like a wand. I use bardic inspiration. Cool. But you already used that last turn, said Mateo, one of Charlie's friends. Lucy narrowed her eyes. I sing louder. Fine, Charlie sighed. Roll for volume. Lucy rolled a natural 20. The attic windows rattled. From below, Arthur shouted, the roof's not structurally rated for that much enthusiasm. Emily's POV. Emily peeked up the stairs. Are they chanting? Greg sighed. They've reached the musical numbers stage. Arthur chuckled. Ah, campaign musicals. A lost art. Sherry nudged him. Don't encourage them. Arthur cupped his hands. Sing from the diaphragm. A chorus of off-key teenage war cries followed. Greg groaned. You realize they'll never stop now. Emily grinned. Let them have their fun. They're keeping the magic alive. Greg looked at her. Same bright smile. Same spark in her eyes. Yeah, they really are. Lucy's POV. Charlie narrated dramatically. The dragon collapses. The treasure is yours. The players cheered. Lucy leaned over, whispering. Hey, we should prank them. Charlie perked up. How? Lucy grinned. Final twist. We pretend the treasure's cursed. Charlie's grin matched hers. You're evil. I prefer creatively chaotic. They waited until everyone was celebrating. Then Charlie slammed his notebook shut. Suddenly, he roared. The gold turns to sand. The room begins to collapse. Teenagers screamed. Dice rolled everywhere. Someone shouted. Not again. Downstairs, Greg's mug froze halfway to his mouth. Tell me they're not faking another apocalypse. Arthur looked delighted. Maybe I will cast pastries. Arthur's POV, he climbed the stairs, slowly, one deliberate step at a time, while Sherry muttered behind him, "You're supposed to rest, not referee." Arthur reached the top just as Charlie was describing a dimensional rift that may or may not lead to snack storage. He clapped once. "All right, my heroes. The dimensional rift now leads directly to bedtime." Groans echoed. "Come on, Grandpa," Lucy pleaded. "One more roll." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Fine, one roll. If you get a 20, you win dessert." Charlie rolled. It tumbled across the table and landed on 20. Cheers exploded. Arthur laughed so hard he had to sit down. The dice never lie. Sherry shouted from below. "Arthur, stop gambling with dessert." Greg's POV, by midnight, the house finally quieted. The kids were asleep in a pile of blankets and snack wrappers, the red D20 resting between them like a relic. Greg draped a blanket over Charlie and Lucy, smiling softly. Emily slipped her arm around him. "They've built their own world," she whispered. He nodded. "Just like we did." They stood there for a while, watching the next generation of storytellers dream. Then, from somewhere in the dark, Arthur's voice floated up the stairs. "Don't forget to write down the campaign log." Emily laughed quietly. "He'll be saying that forever." "Good," Greg said. "It means the adventure never ends." Arthur's journal. Epilogue of epilogues. New campaign launched DMs. Charlie and Lucy genre. Teenagers, trouble, and too much sugar status. Chaotic good notes. The dice keep rolling, the laughter keeps echoing, and love, thank heavens, keeps leveling up. He set down the pen and listened to the muffled giggles from the attic. Sherry leaned her head on his shoulder. "Still the best sound in the world?" Arthur smiled. "Always. The end."